hope that you had a great week. This week, Dad's going to pick up on where he left last week and talk about base saturation.
Perfect. We hope that you've had a great week. And like Jill said, this week we're going to finish out our conversation on base saturations and how can we help to manage our soils for crop success. So now that we've reviewed our CEC and that base saturation, let's start to talk about what does it mean when our base saturation values are different. So we're going to stay over here on the right-hand side. What we notice is we would have two identical soils. The CEC, that number of exchange sites, is identical. The difference that we're going to have is the proportion or the percent that is occupied by our bases, our calcium, our magnesium, and our potassium. On this left-hand side, what we notice is that we have 1, 2, 3 acidic cations, right? Those are our hydrogen type ones. They're going to work to lower our soil pH. What we notice is that as our soil pH decreases, remember 7 is neutral. Most of our crops, when we think about Midwest, is going to be that 6.2, 6.3 up to about 6.8, right? We're always going to have a range of that depending on what crop we look at. But what we notice is as we have more acidic cations, I have fewer places that I can hold my base cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium. We also know that as we lower our pH, we're going to tie up some of the nutrients as well. But we can visualize what's happening. Let's just say on this instance, we limed this soil. We used a calcitic lime. We could have used a dolomite lime. We'll talk about that in some upcoming videos. But if I were to lime this soil, what I've done is actually shed off some of those hydrogen protons. And we can see now that they have been occupied by a calcium and another calcium. So my base saturation of calcium has gone up as I've limed the soil. The same thing would work if we're using a dolomite lime that has magnesium in it. We'd be adding magnesium in and we'd be shedding off these hydrogen protons, helping us to neutralize that soil pH. Or let's say we're putting on some dry fall fertilizer, right? I know a lot of people have been going out and putting on some potash. We could add a dry fall fertilizer. We could be putting on some potash, and that potash could do the same thing if we're keeping everything in that balance, right? We're working to achieve the balance that we're going to have in there. So let's just talk briefly as we wrap this up for today about why do we focus on these three and what are a few things that we can be doing to help us be able to maximize this. Well, first of all, I always want to tell people never go to the extremes. When we come in, whether we're dealing with this soil right here that would have a lower pH, or we're dealing with this soil right here that maybe actually would be above 7, it might be in that mid 7s, or we're down here and we're dealing with sands, we need to be really careful because there's just not very many sites on those light CEC or those sandy soils, is don't go to extremes. We want to make sure that we're managing our soils. So on a nice heavier CEC soil, we might put a couple of tons of either a calcitic lime or a dolomite lime, depending on is the calcium or the magnesium in or out of their optimal ranges. However, when we're down here on the sands, we probably only need to be applying small amounts of lime because there's just not that many holding sites. So that would be the first thing. Make sure that we're not going to the extremes. The second part, though, is these values are great and we get so much good information from them, but it actually isn't telling us exactly how much is available to our crops. So we also want to be looking at how are we going to build our soils. I was talking to a guy last night on the phone and they were picking up some rented ground and they were going in and they're like, man, our potassium is just low. They're a no-till. It's going to take some time as we think about replacing potassium in a no-till situation because it's slow to move down through that soil profile. So I recommended to them look at crop removal and then let's start to look at a build program. We need to know how much of this our crops are going to need, but if we're wanting to make changes, we also need to be building that. I think about it as a bank account, right? We have our checking account and we have our savings account. How much can we put into our savings account each month so that we start to build that up? Because what it lets us do over time then is when we need to, we can pull that back out because it's a reserve that we're going to have in there. So again, make smaller changes, be reasonable, don't go to the extremes. It takes time, right, as we look at changing these, but let's talk about why should we care. So when we think about calcium, remember 65 to 75%, maybe up to 80%. Calcium is extremely important in regulating soil pH. We see it in almost all of the cell walls, giving us strength within those. But also another key thing about calcium is it helps plant take other nutrients in. And so when we think about why do we have these higher values of calcium, that is why. Because we need to be able to utilize it for multiple things across there. Magnesium, remember our magnesiums are going to be in that 10 to 15, maybe 18 or 20% range. A key thing with magnesium is it's the central portion of chlorophyll. So we want to make sure that we have this. Now, I will tell you, different places that we go have different problems. A lot of our guys up in northern part, Minnesota, Wisconsin, a lot of their soils are naturally high in calcium. However, I've been on a lot of places where our magnesium base saturations are in our single digits. And what do we see? We see chlorosis of between the veins. So intervenal chlorosis or yellowing. Why does that make sense? We have to have it to form chlorophyll. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that in there. It also helps us to transport different photosynthate or the end product of photosynthesis throughout that plant. And it's key for enzyme activation. So again, it's important that we keep it in that range. However, with magnesium, if we go too extreme, we put too much dolomitic lime on there, we can make our soils really tight with too much magnesium due to the small size of that atom. And so we need to be careful to keep it in that range and not go extreme. And then that last one is potassium. Remember, potassium is the one that we have in the smallest amount, 3 to 5%, 6% maybe, but it's often what I see is going to be lacking on most of our soil tests. The reason that the reason that potassium is so important is it's key to stalk strength, right? So a lot of times if we're dealing with hybrids that have done great for us in the past, and then we get into a year or two and it's like we have a lot of lodging, a lot of snap that's happening in there, we probably want to take a look at that potassium because it's key in stalk strength and it's key with water balance. In fact, potassium can only be taken in as the plant takes up that water. And also once it's in the plant, it helps with drought stress because it's going to help keep those stomata, the holes that carbon dioxide come in, open, right? So base saturation is so important. I know it's only one part and base saturation can't tell us the whole story. It's going to be part of our management, but we definitely want to start by looking at what is our CEC, what is our base saturation, and what can we start doing now to prepare for success down the road. We know that changing our base saturations can be slow, especially when we're in a minimum till or a no-till situation. But even under conventional tillage, there's only so much money or resources that's available every year for our acres of ground. So what are things that we can do during the growing season to help correct deficiencies? Potassium deficiency is very characteristic. The outside margins of our corn leaf or our soybean leaf become yellowed and will eventually have necrosis that's going to occur at that point. We can go in and we can foliar feed. Now, I always tell my clients, foliar feeding potassium is not going to fix your soils, right? We know that we need to be working on our soils. However, drought stress, lack of water, heat can keep plants from being able to utilize all of those nutrients. A foliar application of potassium during the growing season can work to supplement a good soil fertility program. We can look at such things as a KSB from AgXplore or a Nutri-K, which is a potassium acetate that we can tank mix as we're already going through on our first post pass, on a herbicide pass. I know a lot of guys are making 1 or 2 fungicide passes this year, so we can work to time the availability of nutrients to when the plants are going to need those as well.
We hope that you have a great week and stay warm. We're hoping for more snow tonight so we can do more four-wheeler sledding.